Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to my hobby blog. Today I'm very excited because I finished book 5 of Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe called Autarch of the New Sun, which is this novel here. I have a very nice edition of it. I think it's Toy. No, it's Orbit. But I absolutely love this book. I I don't know how Gene Wolfe decided before writing this book that Book of the New Sun would end with Citadel of the Autarch. Because, and I read this in I think it's the introduction of this book, or it's online on the Wikipedia, but from what I read, this book was basically like requested by the fans because after the end of Citadel of the Autarch and Severian shows up to the Atrium of Time, it sort of ends, and you're like, oh, WTF? Like, I want to know more about what happens with Severian, and this book goes into it. Like, I don't know how Gene Wolfe conceptualized the series without this book, because this book is so important, and it finishes out the story that Book the New Sun begins with. And I just loved it. I loved every single chapter in this book. I loved all of the characters, but mostly I just love the way that Gene Wolfe basically reconceptualizes everything and recontextualizes everything that happened in the first 4 volumes of Book of the New Sun. Like, this book just brings all of the concepts, all of the characters, all of the ideas, themes, everything together, and then twists it so that you get an entirely new understanding of it, and the entire picture locks in together, and it makes it so it's mostly understandable. But one thing that I realized while reading this book is that I really want to reread Book the New Sun, which I say every volume, but this book really sort of takes everything and puts it into a nice box for you to understand the overarching story about. Because, from my understanding, this entire book is basically revealing to the reader that Severian is actually a time traveler, and there's many different copies of him moving throughout time trying to get the new sun back. And it is such an interesting discovery, because throughout the narrative we have gotten a few mentions of various Severians, like, oh, I found a body at the bottom of this elevator that looked exactly like mine. Huh, that's weird. Anyways, continuing on, and Severian would just not think about that. And it's in this novel that Severian reveals that he has done this a million times, and there's really no, it's not like it feels like a closed loop time travel thing where everything is constantly happening at the same moment, but it's happening separately from each other. Because the way that I understand it is that the original Severian was the torturer that we know in book 1. And it's basically from the moment he dies, and I think it's Abaya or one of the giant women who lift him back up, and it's basically that copy of him is from the future or something like that, and so now there's like 2 Severians, and they're moving throughout time singularly, and every single time that Severian sort of has this moment of, I guess, discovery. I don't know how to articulate it, but it seems like every time there was a major story moment where Severian needed to go to this next step to sort of continue the, I guess, checklist that he had to finish in order to bring the new sun back, it seemed like every time he met one of those items, that was the time that there was a different Severian looping back around in the time travel to fix that, because that Severian would somehow fail in that. And so this was sort of the feeling that I was getting throughout Book of the New Sun, was this idea about free will and about prophecy and all that. Because Severian definitely seems like a character early in Book of the New Sun where he has no agency. He's just sort of following along with what Dr. Talos and Father Nere and everyone else is telling him to do. But then you get to this book, and you realize that Severian has basically been running the game the entire time. From the moment that the new sun dies, or the old sun dies, and the new sun is brought in. And we get all this really fascinating descriptions about Yesod, which I think is a spaceship that Severian goes on and visits in order to, I guess, create his own star, because Severian mentions that he has a source of power in space that he is able to draw upon. And that's sort of like an entire planet that has his power within it, because as we get revealed in Citadel the Autarch, Severian himself had this magic, and it wasn't the claw of the Conciliator that was causing everyone to come back to life. So it was actually Severian tapping into this faraway celestial body and then doing all these things. And when he's up in Yesod, he talks about how he's really trying to find a way to destroy the old sun to bring in the old sun. And that's sort of the big crest that Severian is trying to reach. From what I understand, again, this is something that I feel like I have 80% grasp on of the story of this book. But as I talk about it, I feel as if I'm wrong in articulating these events. But this is my interpretation of what happened. Is that Severian, in the very first chapters, we see him traveling to space on this great ship with these really big sails, and it's a really fascinating ship. But he goes to Yesod, and he meets the three Kakagens who he meets before his fight with Baldanders. And one of them is Familimus, I believe is how you say his name. And the other two, I don't really have the full name straight in my head. But all three of them I really, really enjoy. They give a lot of details and description about what Severian is trying to do. And it is so fascinating. And I was not trying to 100% understand everything in this book as I read it, because this book is really, really hard to understand. And so I was more just trying to get the main beats of it. But Severian is basically going to space to meet all these different people in order to bring in the new sun, because everyone knows at this point that that Earth is about to die and is about to be turned into the latest ice age, because the South, or they talk about the belt, which is the crater, and how the very southern ends are now becoming frozen, and all this ice is spreading throughout the entire continent and up, closer and closer to the equator where the sun is always shining. So, excuse me, my got dry for a second. But so he meets these three individuals, these Kakagens, and they tell him all about how they've met him before, and they are going up and down the coda of time, they call it. And it's basically like they are going backwards through time while Severian is, coming forwards in times. And Severian gets to that end point that he's trying to get to. And from that end point, he works with the Fountain of Light, I believe he calls it. And he works with that Fountain of Light to bring in the new sun. And he's like, okay, I'm done. And we're only halfway done with the book by that point. And I was really shocked because I thought we would have him bringing the old son and bringing in the new son at the end of the book, but he does it halfway through the book. And then we get his entire journey going backwards through time because he meets Ida again on the ship. And from that moment on, I ended up reading the rest of the book in like a day. So a lot of this is kind of going through my head, very kind of mashed together. There's really no sense to it, but I loved it from beginning to end. And I really, really enjoyed revisiting all of these characters that we met throughout Book of the New Sun, because Severian, on his journey back through time to go back to the present, of what we recognize as the present, he is meeting Baldandas again, Dr. Talos. I think he meets Dorcas at one point because he thinks about her at one point and is like, wow, I bet she's still angry that I revived her many years after her original time, and she just sort of had to start over in life. And it was just so much fun to get Severian going through all of these different settings that we've seen him in, revisiting Thrax, Nessus, the House Absolute, going through Giol when he walks on the bottom of the river and is walking through. Like, I loved everything in this book. Like, I just ended up reading it so quickly that I ended up not really understanding it, like, linearly, but in my head, like, this is definitely, like, the Severian book, because Book the New Sun is definitely about Severian, but I think it is more about the New Sun. And Earth of the New Sun brings together, like, everything in Book the New Sun and reveals that it's actually, this entire series has been about Severian, which maybe I'm stupid, I don't know, but I really thought that we would somehow be revealed that there was some, like, outer deity, like, controlling all of this. Because we meet in Book 2, through the brown book that Severian opens in the House Absolute, this great being with great rings and all this stuff. And we end up actually meeting this entity in this book, and we get a lot of details, and I really am trying to remember her name. Oh, Zadkiel. Tzadkiel, I believe is the name of this entity. And this entity flies down to Earth and is like, I remember you. I remember us locking eyes. And I knew that you were the one to bring the new sun. So I've been keeping my eye on you. And everything with her was just amazing. I loved it. And I just absolutely want to read it again. Like, it is such a, like, masterpiece, in my opinion. All 5 volumes. It is absolutely essential for anyone who's reading these books to read Earth of the New Sun. I absolutely cannot fathom how Gene Wolfe ended Book of the New Sun with Citadel of the Autarch back in the 80s. And was like, yeah, I'm done. And he had no plans to write more about Severian. I do not believe that. I think he was trolling his audience. I don't know. Because Earth of the New Sun is so important to understanding Book of the New Sun. And I just love this book. I think Book of the New Sun's my favorite series after reading this. I don't know how else to conceptualize it within my sort of rankings of the greatest works, because this book just has so many layers, and I love it. I just absolutely love this book. I loved reading all of the interactions that Severian had with all the other characters, as I already said. But one particularly I especially loved was him meeting with the giant woman again, who rescued him or talked to him in Book 1, I believe, when she lifts him up on his palm and is talking to him in the river, Giol. And in this book, we see her entire body. and it's this giant being that can barely even move. And I just loved that scene because it brought together so many story events and made the books much easier to understand. So that's why I'm really looking forward to rereading it. I don't know when I will reread this, but I just loved it. I love these books. I love Gene Wolfe. I cannot wait to get into more of his books. I think I will read The Wizard and the Knight next. That series. I have book 1. But I'm so looking forward to that because I've heard it's just as good as Book of the New Sun, so that's very exciting for me. I don't think I can ever not recommend this book to everybody. I think I will be recommending everybody read this series. Don't worry about if you don't get it, because there's always the next read. I don't think there's such a thing as spoilers in the series as well, so any help that you need reading this, or any help that new readers need reading the series, I think it's okay to look at the dictionary and to use Alsabo Zoop, because they are absolutely helpful in understanding the series. And wow, I'm just gobsmacked at how just wonderful Book the New Sun is. And this book just brought it all together, and I loved it. And I wish I could read the series again right now, but I need to take a break, let it all simmer, get myself more acquainted, and then start my new read. So without further ado, thank you all so much for watching, and please let me know what you thought of this book.